first, let's get you caught up to speed on the top legal headlines of the day.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. The body of a dead fetus was discovered on a commercial airplane at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. Authorities say the fetus was discovered on an American Airlines Airbus A321 plane, which was last used on Monday night for a flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to New York City. The plane's cleaning crew reportedly found the fetus inside the airplane's bathroom in the toilet. The fetus is believed to be 5 or 6 months old. The nail salon in New York City, where this violent melee took place, remains closed after protests forced it to shutter. The wild brawl reportedly started at New Red Apple Nails in Brooklyn when a customer refused to pay after she accused a worker of messing up her eyebrow. Customer Christina Thomas and nail salon employee Huiyu Zhang were both arrested and have been released from police custody. The video sparked protests due to the racial nature of the attack. Convicted sex offender Bill Cosby is asking a judge to dismiss a defamation lawsuit filed against him because his accuser is a public figure and not a private citizen. Actress Catherine McKee accused Cosby of sexually assaulting her in 1974, and when Cosby called her a liar, she filed a civil suit against the disgraced comedian. Cosby, who's been accused of sexual misconduct by over 60 women, was convicted of sexually assaulting Andrea Constant at his home in Pennsylvania in 2004. Cosby could face up to 30 years in prison when sentenced in September. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, let's break down this Bill Cosby defamation case a little bit. Rachel Kugel is an attorney here in New York City. She's with us on the Law and Crime Network this morning. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this? You got Bill Cosby. Everybody knows who he is, okay? And then you've got Catherine McKee. She says he sexually abused her years ago. It's beyond the statute of limitations. So she really can't try to get him prosecuted criminally. So then he calls her a liar, so she sues him for defamation.
Right.
Then he's trying to use the public figure language in the defamation law as kind of a shield,
right,
and say, hey, look, I made this comment about you, and because you're a public figure, I can say a lot of things about you. It's a higher standard in a defamation case.
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. So basically what he's talking about is defamation has certain defenses to it. One of them is specifically if someone is in the public sphere. So basically if someone puts themselves out into the public space, you're allowed to talk about them, and you're allowed to talk about them in a different way. Also, what's interesting is public sphere or public space actually it doesn't mean what you necessarily think it means. You know, someone could be a local politician and be, quote unquote, in the public sphere. Someone could be a lower level C-list actress and be in the public sphere. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're as famous as Bill Cosby or the President of the United States. It doesn't take much, really, to get, quote, that in the public sphere language.
Yeah, you've got all-purpose public figures. That would be Bill Cosby, Madonna, Lady Gaga, you name it. Okay, really famous people. They have a really high burden to prove in a defamation lawsuit if one of these public figures, that is, sues someone for defaming them. Then you have limited purpose public figures, but here Cosby's basically saying, okay, you're a public figure, therefore you have to prove that I spoke about you with actual malice, and that's just a fancy legal term for the speaker's attitude towards the truth. So basically what this would test is whether Cosby was being vindictive to the truth rather than vindictive to the actual plaintiff here, the actress who's suing him.
Right, and it's interesting too because in the context of what was happening at the time, you know, arguably what he was saying, if I could just play, you know, sort of devil's advocate, so to speak, the context of what he was saying was about sort of defending himself, and I think that's an interesting tact. In other words, it's not just about calling her a liar for the sake of it, for the sake of impugning her credibility only, but also for sort of propping himself up in the public space as a public figure. I think it's an interesting argument. I think it does have some merit. In other words, it's not totally frivolous. I think there's a point to it.
It's not. It's an interesting one because you basically have more famous person pointing to the other person saying, well, you're just as famous, or you're at least famous enough where I can get away with this. That's what makes it a little bit bizarre.
Right, and she put herself in the public sphere, too, by then stepping out and making these accusations and claims about him. So she was in the public sphere to begin with, and then kind of escalated that by putting herself out there. Then what he says is arguably not for the malice of defaming her character, but to defend himself. So I think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but it certainly has some merit.
It all boils down to a he said, she said here. This will be an interesting case to watch, so we're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to switch and talk now about the Leon Jacob case, the case we're going to be examining today here on the Law and Crime Network. What do you make of this guy? This guy had a plum job.
Yeah.
Okay, his marriage fell apart. He had a new girlfriend who apparently was really into him, and then they're accused of plotting to kill both of their exes.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, too, it seems, you know, listen, it's very poorly thought out. They obviously didn't think very deeply about this for smart people, because the whole thing kind of transpires. I think their entire relationship was like 8 weeks. You know, so the whole thing kind of transpires very quickly. They go from meeting each other, having a relationship, to allegedly plotting murders within a couple of weeks. You know, it's an extraordinarily interesting case. It certainly points to all kinds of problems with human nature and love triangles and ego. He's an interesting character.
I said in the original case, this is more like a love trapezoid or something, because it's two
right.
people accused of trying to kill two other people, and it's certainly kind of like not sitting square.
Right.
So it's something. I don't know how to describe it. But look, we're going to jump right into it here with the testimony of the purported hitman here. This is a former U.S. Army soldier who was the guy who they were trying to hire, allegedly, to commit this hit. We're going to jump right in with his testimony. We are talking about the Leon Jacob case out of Texas. That is the man who was purportedly hired to be a hitman to take out the defendant's ex-wife and the defendant's new girlfriend's ex-husband. This is the very beginning of his testimony. Look, obviously this didn't go down. The police got involved. The police ultimately staged a fake crime scene to try to convince the two defendants that this actually did happen. So Rachel Kugel is here. This is the kind of person to get on the stand for prosecutors and really sell him as one of the key witnesses.
Yeah, so in these cases, there's always, you know, that witness where, you know, it's the person who was supposedly hired. And that's an important witness in any murder for hire plot, is that person who was hired to do the job. So this guy is the first person hired, right? Ultimately, once the police get involved, they end up, I believe, replacing him, essentially, and stepping in. But this guy was the first guy hired. He was paid some money and then allegedly, I believe, disappeared. And so didn't actually do what he was supposed to do. And what starts the ball rolling is Leon Jacob then tries to find him. Hey, I paid this guy some money. Nothing happened. You know, what the heck? And that's, I think, actually the beginning of the end for him, is him looking into that and his ultimate downfall and what happened to that money he paid this guy.
And real quickly, is he believable?
So, I mean, I think he is. You know, they actually lucked out with this witness. He's a former soldier. You know, a lot of times the problem with these guys is, you know, prosecutors don't choose the witnesses they get. And in this case,
they've got to go forward. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a second. Testimony there from the man who Leon Jacob, the defendant in this case, allegedly tried to hire to be a hitman to take out his ex-girlfriend. Then at some point, his new girlfriend joined in with this plot, allegedly to also ask the hitman to try to take out her ex-husband. So, Rachel Kugel is here with us on the Law and Crime Network. $2,500 apparently was the cash that this defendant flashed to prove to this guy that he was serious.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is so poorly thought out. I mean, he meets with someone that he doesn't know. He has no prior relationship with. He doesn't know that this person is an actual hitman. The price is, you know, not to be crude here, but it's relatively cheap for what he's looking to do, in my humble opinion. You know, as a criminal defense attorney, I think it's a relatively low cost, and yet for some inexplicable reason, the defendant in this case, you know, trusts these people he's never met before, and he does it over and over again. You know, he does it with this guy, and ultimately later does it with people that are, you know, really undercover police officers. So it's a bizarre sort of show of ego that this guy thinks that nothing can touch him, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and of course that eventually plays out. He does a TV interview behind bars when he's waiting for trial.
Yeah, I mean, so So the display of ego here is incredible, and honestly, I think, that's probably a big part of the reason, he went down in this case, was about ego, was about his belief that he could sort of charm anybody, including the police, and most importantly, eventually, as we see as this testimony continues, the jury.
Well, we're going to continue our review of the Leon Jacob case in a couple of minutes with a little bit more testimony from that mercenary in his own words. We're going to continue on with that. Again, this is a case out of Texas where a man out of med school is accused of trying to hire a hitman to take out his ex-girlfriend. We will be right back here on Law and Crime. All right, the man you were listening to right there was an alleged hitman who was at least the first one contacted allegedly by defendant Leon Jacob. He said there that Jacob was self-obsessed and really wanted it done. So Rachel Kugel, those are the words that really stuck out in my head from that clip that we just watched.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we talked about it. This is a guy full of ego and perceived charm, self-perceived charm. My only thing with this guy is he seems rather self-obsessed to me, too. If I'm a juror watching this, I think this whole case is filled with people that are full of themselves and their ego. If this guy is sitting there, I think, talking about what a hero he is and how he protected her, and I'm not buying it. Personally.
You're not buying it? I don't know. Well, he is sitting there saying some pretty incriminating stuff because he claims he was involved in these conversations that involved the hiring of him, at least initially, to take out a hit on Leon Jacob's previous girlfriend, Megan Veracus, as well as his new girlfriend's ex-husband. Those are the allegations. We're going to continue listening to his testimony when we come back here on the Law and Crime Network in just a few minutes, so stick around. We will be right back. Wow, footage taken in the parking lot at a restaurant in Texas where this man on the witness stand who claims that he was being hired as a hitman to take out defendant Leon Jacob's former girlfriend. He's breaking it all down, explaining what was being said in that video. No sound on the video itself. Rachel Kugel is here, and we were kind of wondering, at least I was, maybe they didn't record sound because maybe they didn't have a warrant that would have allowed for it. Then you get wiretapping concerns.
Right, yeah. I think at this point it was still very early in the investigation. They're still trying to figure out what's going on. So they were able to get some kind of footage. It could even be some kind of surveillance outside in the parking lot.
It was following around a little bit too closely to look like it was like an actual surveillance camera. It looks like it's from a police van or something.
Right, but what does it really show? I mean, all it really proves...
Two people showing and talking in a parking lot.
I mean, all it really proves is he's credible in some sense in that it puts them together, right? I mean, it confirms his story that they were together at Olive Garden, but it doesn't get to the heart of what is the defense in this case, which is, did he want her killed or did he want her kidnapped so that she wouldn't show up, or scared so that she wouldn't show up for this, stalking and assault charges. And I think, that's really the crux of the defense, and that's really what's so important about this witness's testimony. When we're talking about his credibility, I'm not suggesting that he's completely incredible. Obviously they were together. Obviously, there was some discussion of bad behavior. The question is that bad behavior kidnapping, witness tampering, or does it rise to the level of solicitation of murder?
Well, look, I mean, he's saying that the defendant is telling me in this video that he's mad that I didn't, get the job done, which was taken to be this murder for hire scheme.
Yeah, but what I think is so interesting about it is when they actually talk about what was said, the actual words that were used, most of the words that were used relate to having her disappear, having her not show up, for this
I mean, so what does he have to say? Make her swim with the fishes? I mean,
well,
how far does it have to go?
I just think there's a big difference, though. And when this guy starts talking about, now his credibility is in question, because when he starts talking about, I interpreted as he wanted her dead, well, what did he actually say, though? I mean, is that a fair interpretation? Is that credible? And is this guy credible? Because he's certainly trying to make this into a very big deal for himself, where he's the hero of the story.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely injecting some self-serving statements into this. But look, we're going to continue to listen to more testimony in the Leon Jacob case as the day grinds along here on Law and Crime. We're also keeping an eye on a possible sentencing hearing in Ohio that we might be able to bring to you. We're not sure exactly when it's going to pick up, but this has to do with a defendant accused of stealing nearly $500,000 from a company. We're hoping to bring that to you live. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on the Leon Jacob case when we resume here on the Law and Crime Network. All right, that was some of the cross-examination of the man who claims that he believed he was being hired as a hitman to take out defendant Leon Jacob's ex-girlfriend, and then possibly, eventually, his new girlfriend's ex-husband. Rachel Kugel is a defense attorney here in New York City. Your analysis of the cross-examination.
Yeah, I mean, so far, it's exactly what we were talking about, which is trying to take apart this sort of broad thing that the prosecutor's trying to make, where the prosecutor's trying to lump this into this big, hey, look at the totality of the circumstances. This guy was trying to buy a murder. Well, the defense is trying to break it up into small pieces and say, look, at what time did he actually ask for a murder? So first, with regard to the money, he's not being honest. He was paid money. He wasn't being honest to the police about how much. Keep in mind, he's not the one that ever called the police or the prosecutor. So this idea that he's protecting Megan is just sort of hard to swallow. And again, the idea that he's remaining anonymous because he, the hitman, is scared of the defendant. I mean, he's supposed to be the hitman, and he's scared of the defendant. I mean, that's also just sort of an unbelievable position. So what the defense is trying to do is take it apart. And I think that's smart, because if you take it apart, hopefully you won't find murder.
Yeah, I mean, we have to really dial back time in cases like this and be very, very critical of when things happen. But look, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more in just a moment here on Law and Crime. Welcome back, folks. We're talking about the Leon Jacob murder-for-hire case out of the Houston, Texas area, and we're just listening to testimony from an undercover police officer who was involved in this investigation. He's the one that was recording sort of surreptitious surveillance-type video of the alleged hitman speaking with the defendant. Rachel Kugel is here in studio with us in New York City. So what do you make of this cop? I mean, some of his role was almost secretarial. He's like lining up these meetings so that he can kind of peek over the alleged hitman's shoulder.
So there's two important takeaways for us. One is, just rules of evidence, rules of court. He's there to authenticate certain things. He's there to authenticate certain videos that were taken. He's there to authenticate certain photographs that were ultimately staged that you've talked a bit about. So I think he's there for that purpose. And also just for all of us to consider, we talked about warrants and whether they were needed. This kind of drives the point home of, hey, don't plan that murder in an Olive Garden, because no warrants needed. They can put all kinds of people all over the place in the booth right next to you to watch that, right? So this just goes right to that fact of, if you're going to plan that murder, let's not do it in Olive Garden.
Yeah, they can. So if there's not an expectation of privacy, they can record sound basically. But if there is, if there's nobody else around, they really can't. That's probably why we didn't have sound in the parking lot.
That's right. But it also allows them, because they're in this public place, it allows them to put people all over the place, which just is bad for Leon Jacob, right? Because it just creates this whole scenario that starts to look worse and worse and worse.
Well, look, I know you need to hit the road, so thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to be back in just a bit here on the Law and Crime Network with more testimony from the Leon Jacob case. We're going to be moving to a new witness now, and we will also have a special guest who you will definitely want to stick around to see. We will be back in just a few minutes here on the Law and Crime Network.